The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people on Earth had looked up at the night sky and wondered what was out there. When they finally built ships that could travel between stars, they found the answer. The galaxy was full of life. Hundreds of alien species had built civilizations across thousands of worlds. They had formed something called the Galactic Concord, a great alliance where different species traded and talked and lived in peace. But they did not want humans. Admiral Katie Brennan stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Relentless Hope, and read the message on her screen for the third time. The words were polite, but their meaning was clear. The Valari Dominion had rejected humanity's request for trade. Rights. Again, this was the 14th species to say no in the past year. Alone. Same answer as always, said Commander Lucas Holt. He stood beside her, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had served in the fleet for 30 years, and he had seen this rejection many times before. Katie turned off the screen and looked out at the stars. They are afraid of us, Lucas. They have always been afraid of us. She understood why. When humans first made contact with alien life, they had expected wonder and friendship. Instead, they found fear. The Galactic Concord had taken one look at Earth and called it a Category 9 death world. This was the most dangerous rating possible. Earth had earthquakes that shook entire continents. It had storms that could destroy cities. It had volcanoes that blocked out the sun. It had predators with sharp teeth and deadly venom. And somehow, humans had not only survived on this terrible world, but had become its dominant species. To the aliens of the Concord. This made humans monsters. The Valari were tall and beautiful creatures with skin like pearls and eyes like liquid silver. They lived on a world with gentle breezes and soft rains. They had never known true danger. When they learned that humans could survive injuries that would kill other species, they were horrified. When they discovered that humans drank poison for fun and called it coffee, they were disgusted. When they found out that humans kept wolves in their homes and called them pets, they were terrified. So they kept humanity locked away in a small corner of the galaxy. No trade, no friendship, no contact. Lieutenant Dana Price looked up from her station. She was young, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her job was to monitor all communications in the sector. Admiral, I am picking up something strange. Katie walked over to her station. What is it? Dana's fingers moved across her controls. It is a distress signal. Very weak. It is coming from... She stopped and looked up with wide eyes. It is coming from Valari Prime. Lucas moved closer. The Valari homeworld? What kind of distress signal? Dana listened to her earpiece. Her face went pale. It is a swarm warning. Admiral, the Catham attacked Valari Prime. The bridge went silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing. The Keth swarm was the greatest terror in the galaxy. They were a species of insect-like creatures that traveled from world to world, consuming everything in their path. They ate plants and animals and people. They stripped planets down to bare rock. No civilization had ever survived a full swarm attack. Katie felt her heart beat faster. The Valari had just rejected humanity. They had called humans dangerous and untrustworthy. They had said they wanted nothing to do with Earth. But now they were dying. How bad is it? Katie asked. Dana shook her head slowly. Their fleet is gone. Their orbital defenses have fallen. The swarm is landing on the surface. Millions of Valari are trapped in their cities. Lucas stepped close to Katie and spoke quietly. Admiral, this is not our fight. The Valari have never done anything for us. They have spent 300 years treating us like animals. If we go there, we will lose ships. We will lose people. Katie knew he was right. She thought about all the times the Concord had turned humanity away. She thought about all the insults and rejections and closed doors. She thought about the alien diplomats who would not even shake human hands because they were afraid of being crushed. Then she thought about the Valari. She imagined their beautiful crystal cities burning. She imagined their children screaming as the Keth tore through their streets. She imagined an entire civilization dying because no one was brave enough to help them. "Set course for Valari Prime," Katie said. "Maximum speed." Lucas stared at her. "Katie, think about this." She turned to face him. "I have thought about it, Lucas. I have thought about what kind of species we want to be. Do we want to be the monsters they think we are? Do we want to let billions die because they hurt our feelings?" Lucas said nothing. Katie raised her voice so everyone on the bridge could hear. "The Valari called us Deathworlders. They said we were too dangerous to trust. Maybe they were right. Maybe humans are dangerous." She looked around at her crew. "But today, we are going to be dangerous for them. We are going to show the galaxy what Deathworlders can do when we fight for something other than ourselves." She pressed the button that opened communications to every ship in the fleet. 27 warships, carrying over 50,000 humans, waited for her orders. "All ships, this is Admiral Brennan. The Valari homeworld is under attack by the Keth swarm. I know what you are thinking. I know the Valari have never been our friends. But that does not matter right now. What matters is that millions of innocent people are about to die, and we are the only ones close enough to help them." She paused and took a breath. "I will not order you to follow me. This is a volunteer mission. Anyone who wants to stay behind can do so without shame. But I am going to Valari Prime. I am going to fight the swarm, and I am going to save as many lives as I can." She waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, every ship in the fleet reported in. "Every single one. The Ironside is with you, Admiral. The Defiant stands ready. The Constellation will follow. 27 ships. 50,000 humans. All of them willing to die for people who hated them." Katie smiled. "Then let us go save some aliens." The fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a trail of light. They did not know if they would survive. They did not know if the Valari would even thank them. But they knew one thing for certain. They were doing the right thing. And sometimes, that was enough. The Terran fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Valari Prime, and for a moment, no one on the Relentless Hope could speak. The sight before them was worse than anything they had imagined. The Keth swarm filled the sky. Thousands upon thousands of ships hung in orbit around the planet. They were not like human ships. They were alive. Each one was a creature of flesh and bone and dark chitin, with wings that stretched for hundreds of meters. They moved like insects, twitching and pulsing with horrible life. Their hulls glowed with a sickly green light that made Katie feel sick just looking at them. Below them, Valari Prime burned. The beautiful crystal cities that the Valari had spent 10,000 years building were now columns of smoke and fire. Even from orbit, Katie could see the swarms of smaller Keth creatures pouring across the surface like a black tide. "Contact count is over 10,000 ships," said Lieutenant Dana Price. Her voice was shaking. "Maybe more. Our sensors cannot get an exact number." Commander Lucas Holt stared at the screen. "We have 27 ships against 10,000. This is suicide." Katie did not answer. She was already thinking, planning, searching for any advantage. Human ships were built differently than other species. They were heavier, tougher, designed to survive the harsh conditions that humans considered normal. Where alien ships were made of light metals and delicate systems, Terran vessels were armored monsters built to take punishment and keep fighting. "Open a channel to Valari Prime," Katie ordered. Dana worked her controls. Channel open. Valari Prime. This is Admiral Katie Brennan of the Terran Defense Fleet. We are here to help. Please respond. Static filled the bridge. Then a voice came through, weak and trembling. It was speaking the Valari language, but the translator turned it into English. Terrans? This is High Minister Celis. Why? Why are you here? We rejected your petition just hours ago. We know, Katie said simply. But you are in trouble, and we can help. Tell us where you need us most. There was a long pause. Katie could hear sounds of chaos in the background, screaming voices and explosions, and the terrible clicking sound that the Keth made when they hunted. Our northern cities still stand, Celis finally said. But the swarm is breaking through our last defenses. If you could buy us time to evacuate, we will do more than that, Katie said. We will stop them. She closed the channel and turned to her crew. All ships, form up for attack. We are going straight through the middle of that swarm. Captain Greg Tanner commanded the destroyer Ironside. He was a stocky man with a bald head and a thick beard. He had fought in 12 battles, but he had never seen anything like this. His ship was positioned at the front of the fleet, and he could see the Keth vessels turning toward them. Thousands of alien eyes, glowing in the darkness. They have noticed us, said Ensign Mia Santos, his tactical officer. She was young, fresh out of the academy, and her hands were trembling over her controls. Greg put a hand on her shoulder. Steady, Ensign. Remember your training. These things might be scary, that they have never fought humans before. They do not know what we can do. The Keth attacked first. A wave of smaller creatures launched from the nearest hive ship, flying toward the Terran fleet like a cloud of locusts. They sprayed acid from their mouths, a weapon that had melted through the hulls of Valari. Warships in seconds thought it splashed against the Ironside's armor and did nothing. Greg smiled grimly. Our turn. All batteries fire. The Terran fleet opened up with everything they had. Cannons designed to punch through asteroids now tore through Keth flesh. Missiles built to destroy planetary defenses now exploded inside living ships. The darkness of space lit up with fire and death, but the Keth were not afraid. They did not retreat. They just kept coming, more and more of them, an endless tide of hunger and destruction. On the relentless hope, Katie watched the battle unfold on her tactical display. Her ships were holding, but they were taking damage. The Keth were learning, adapting, finding weak points in human defenses. Admiral, Dana called out. The Keth are broadcasting something. Some kind of signal. What kind of signal? Dana listened, then her face twisted with discomfort. It is a psychic attack. They are projecting fear directly into our minds. The Valari reports say this is how they break enemy crews. They make them so afraid that they cannot fight. Katie felt it then. A cold wave of terror washing over her, trying to creep into her thoughts. Images flashed through her mind, her ship being torn apart, her crew dying in horrible ways, herself being eaten alive by clicking mandibles. She pushed it away. It was hard, like swimming against a strong current, but she did it. Around her, she saw her crew doing the same. Their faces were pale and sweating, but they kept working. They kept fighting. Humans evolved on a world where everything tried to kill us. Katie said loudly, so everyone could hear. We learned to be afraid and keep going anyway. That is what fear is for. It does not stop us. It makes us stronger. The battle raged for hours. Ships on both sides were destroyed. The carrier Dauntless was swarmed by hundreds of Keth and torn to pieces. The frigate Constellation was crippled by acid and left drifting. Humans died by the hundreds, then by the thousands, but the Keth died by the tens of thousands. Captain Tanner rammed the Ironside directly into a Keth hive ship. Breaking through its outer shell and unleashing his Marines inside. Sergeant Nicole Webb led the boarding party, her squad cutting through the living corridors with fire and blade. "Keep moving," Nicole shouted. She was covered in Keth blood, her armor scored by acid and claws. "These things want to eat us? Let them try. We will give them the worst meal of their lives." Private Danny Reeves laughed even as he fought. "Sarge, I think they are starting to run away from us." Nicole looked and saw that he was right. The Keth warriors, creatures that had never known fear, were backing away from the humans. They had expected easy prey. They had found something else entirely. They had found Deathworlder's dot by the end of the first day. The Terran fleet had killed over 3,000 Keth ships. They had lost 4 of their own. The numbers were impossible, unbelievable, but they were real. On Valari Prime, the survivors watched in amazement as the tide of the battle began to turn. The monsters from Earth had come to save them, and they were winning. High Minister Celis stared at the tactical reports and whispered a single word: impossible. But it was happening. Against all odds, against all logic, humanity was pushing back the swarm, and they were just getting started. 3 days had passed since the battle began, and something impossible was happening above Valari Prime. The Keth swarm was losing. Commander Lucas Hope stood beside Admiral Brennan on the bridge of the Relentless Hope, staring at the tactical display. He had served in the fleet for 30 years. He had seen many battles, but he had never seen anything like this. "They are pulling back," he said quietly, as if speaking too loud might break the spell. "The northern sector is clear. The eastern sector is almost clear. Admiral, I think we are actually winning." Katie nodded slowly. She was exhausted. She had not slept more than 2 hours in the past 3 days. None of her crew had, but they kept fighting. That was what humans did. They pushed through pain and tiredness and fear. They kept going when other species would have given up. The Keth had never faced anything like it. Their attacks followed a simple pattern. They would swarm a planet, break its defenses, project their psychic terror, and then consume everything while the defenders cowered in fear. It had worked against every species they had ever encountered. That it did not work against humans. Human crews fought in shifts. When one group was too tired to continue, another took over. When ships ran low on ammunition, supply vessels brought more from the fleet reserves. When the psychic attacks came, humans gritted their teeth and pushed through the fear. The Keth had no answer for this kind of endurance. They were predators who expected their prey to break and run. When the prey instead stood and fought, hour after hour, day after day, the Keth did not know what to do. But victory came at a terrible price. Katie looked at the casualty list on her personal display. She had read it so many times that she knew many of the names by heart. 4,732 humans had died in the past 3 days. Some had been killed when their ships were destroyed. Others had died in boarding actions, fighting Keth warriors in close combat. A few had sacrificed themselves deliberately, ramming their damaged vessels into Keth. Hive ships to take as many of the enemy with them as possible. Commander Holt had been one of those. On the second day of the battle, his cruiser, the Vigilant, had been surrounded by Keth ships. Instead of trying to escape, he had ordered his crew to the escape pods and then driven his ship straight into the largest Keth vessel. The explosion had killed over 1,000 of the enemy and saved a convoy of Valari refugee ships. Katie still had his last message saved. "Tell the Admiral it was an honor," he had said, "and tell the Valari that not all monsters are evil." She had promoted his second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison, to take his place. Jack was a good officer, steady and reliable, but he was not Lucas. Nobody could be Lucas. On the surface of Valari Prime, the fighting was even more desperate. Major Chris Burke had been commanding ground forces for 50 hours straight. His Marines had formed a defensive line around the capital city of Serenthal, protecting millions of Valari civilians while they evacuated to safer areas. The Valari were not built for war. They were tall and graceful, with delicate bones and sensitive nerves. A wound that a human would barely notice could send a Valari into shock. The sound of explosions made them tremble. The sight of blood made them faint. They had never needed to be tough, because their world had never been dangerous. Chris felt sorry for them. Even though they had spent centuries treating his species like dangerous animals, he was crouched behind a barricade made of broken crystal and burned metal, watching a swarm of Keth warriors approaching from the east. Behind him, thousands of Valari were crowded into transport vehicles, waiting to flee. "Berg to all units," he said into his radio. "Enemy approaching from the east. Hold the line until the last transport is away." Corporal Amy Lynn moved up beside him. She was small for a Marine, but fast and deadly. Her armor was covered in scratches and dents from 3 days of constant fighting. "How many this time?" she asked. Chris looked through his scope. "Maybe 200. Could be more behind them." Amy checked her rifle. "We have about 50 Marines left who can still fight. That is 4-to-1 odds." Chris smiled grimly. "I have seen worse." The Keth charged. They ran on 6 legs, their claws tearing up the ground. Their mandibles clicked together in a sound that had driven other species mad with fear. But the humans did not run. They opened fire. The first wave of Keth fell, then the second. But more kept coming, climbing over the bodies of their dead. They were not afraid of death. They did not know how to be afraid. They only knew hunger. A Keth warrior broke through the line and leaped at Chris. He caught it by the throat and threw it to the ground. Before it could rise, he put 3 bullets in its head. "They are getting through!" Someone shouted. Chris looked and saw that it was true. Keth were pouring over the barricade on the left side. Marines were fighting them hand to hand, knives and fists against claws and mandibles. Then he heard a sound he did not expect. Valari voices shouting. He turned and saw something amazing. A group of Valari civilians had picked up fallen weapons. They were shaking with terror, their beautiful faces twisted with fear, but they were fighting. They were actually fighting. A young Valari male, barely more than a child, stood over a fallen Marine and fired a rifle at an approaching Keth. His aim was terrible. He missed more than he hit. But he did not run. "Why are you doing this?" Chris yelled at him. The Valari looked at him with silver eyes full of tears. "You came to save us. You are dying for us. How can we do less?" Chris felt something in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the battle. For 300 years, aliens had called humans monsters. They had been afraid of human strength, human endurance, human violence. But in that moment, Chris realized that they had missed the point entirely. Humans were not just good at war. They were good at inspiring others. They led by example. They showed what courage looked like, and other species learned to follow. The last transport lifted off just as the sun set. The Keth pulled back, unable to break through the human line. Behind them, the streets were covered with enemy dead. Chris stood in the middle of the carnage, surrounded by exhausted Marines and trembling Valari. He looked at the young alien who had fought beside him. "What is your name?" he asked. "Terrace," the Valari said. "My name is Terrace." Chris put a hand on his shoulder, gently, because he knew how fragile Valari bodies were. "You did good today, Terrace. You should be proud." Terrace looked up at him with wonder in his eyes. "I was so afraid. I am still afraid." "How do you humans fight when you are afraid?" Chris thought about the question. It was something he had never really considered before. Fear was just part of being alive. You felt it, you acknowledged it, and then you did what needed to be done anyway. Fear is not the enemy, Chris said finally. Fear is just your brain telling you that something matters. The people who never feel fear are the ones you should worry about. They do not care about anything. Terrace nodded slowly. I think I understand. Above them, in orbit, the battle continued. But on the ground, in the ruins of a crystal city, a human and a Valari stood together and watched the stars. The tide was turning. On the 5th day of the battle, Admiral Katie Brennan made a decision that would change the war forever. The Keth swarm had lost thousands of ships, but they were still dangerous. As long as their Overmind lived, they would keep fighting, keep breeding, keep attacking. The Overmind was the brain of the entire swarm. It controlled every Keth creature, coordinated their attacks, and directed their hunger. Kill the Overmind, and the swarm would collapse. The problem was finding it. Lieutenant Dana Price had been studying Keth communication patterns for days. She had barely slept. Her eyes were red, and her hands shook from too much coffee. But she had found something. Admiral, she said, pointing to her display. Every Keth signal leads back to this ship. Katie looked at the image on the screen. It was enormous, easily the size of a small moon. Unlike the other Keth vessels, which were dark and organic, this one glowed with a pale inner light. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. The command vessel, Katie said. The Overmind is in there. Yes, Admiral. But look at the defenses. There are at least 1,000 Keth ships forming a protective sphere around it. And the hull is much thicker than the others. Our weapons might not be able to break through. Katie studied the image for a long moment. She thought about the ships she had lost, the people who had died. She thought about Lucas, who had sacrificed himself to save others. She thought about all the Valari who were counting on her. Then she made her decision. We go in ourselves. Full fleet assault on the command vessel. While our ships keep the defenders busy, we send Marines inside to kill the Overmind directly. Colonel Pete Vasquez was a big man with a scarred face and calm eyes. He had led Marines into battle on a dozen different worlds. When Katie explained the plan to him, he simply nodded. How many people do you need? Katie asked. 500 should be enough. If we cannot do it with 500, we cannot do it with 5,000. Katie almost smiled. You understand this might be a one-way trip. Pete shrugged. Admiral, every trip is a one-way trip if you think about it long enough. The only question is whether you do something worthwhile along the way. The assault began at dawn, Valari time. The entire Terran fleet moved toward the command vessel in a tight formation. Keth ships rose to meet them, thousands of organic nightmares blocking the way to their queen. The battle was brutal. Ships on both sides exploded and burned. The destroyer Ironside, which had survived the entire war, was finally torn apart by concentrated acid fire. Captain Greg Tanner went down with his ship, still giving orders until the very end. But the Marines got through. 12 dropships punched through the command vessel's outer membrane and crashed into its interior. 500 humans in powered armor poured out, weapons blazing. The inside of the vessel was unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls were made of flesh and bone. Veins pulsed with strange fluids. The air was thick and humid, like being inside a living body. Stay together, Pete shouted. Standard formations. We moved toward the center. Corporal Amy Lynn was at the front of the advance. She had survived the ground battle in Sorrento and volunteered for this mission without hesitation. When asked why, she had simply said, someone has to go first. The Keth defended their queen with everything they had. Warriors poured from every opening, clawing and biting and spraying acid. They fought with a fury that the Marines had never seen before. But humans fought back harder. A Keth warrior tackled Amy and pinned her to the ground. Its mandibles snapped inches from her face, dripping with acid. She could feel her armor melting where its spit touched. She grabbed its head with both hands and twisted. The creature's neck snapped with a wet crack. She threw the body aside and kept moving. "Lynn, you okay?" called Sergeant Matt Cole, her squad leader. "Fine, Sarge. Just getting warmed up." They fought their way through chamber after chamber, corridor after corridor. The command vessel seemed endless, a maze of organic tunnels that twisted and turned in impossible ways. Marines fell, killed by claws or acid or simply crushed by the sheer weight of Keth bodies. After 2 hours of fighting, only 200 Marines were still alive. After 3 hours, only 100. But they had reached the center of the vessel. The Overmind's chamber was a vast space, big enough to hold a small city. In the center floated the Overmind itself, that it was not what Amy had expected. She had imagined something monstrous, a giant version of the Keth warriors they had been fighting. Instead, the Overmind was almost beautiful. It looked like a massive brain made of crystal and light, suspended in a web of organic cables. Thousands of smaller tendrils connected it to the walls, the ceiling, the floor, and it was looking at them. Pete felt the psychic pressure immediately. It was 100 times stronger than anything they had faced before. Images flooded his mind, his own death, the deaths of his Marines, humanity burning, Earth consumed by the swarm. The Overmind was showing them their future. "It is trying to break us," Pete said through gritted teeth. "Do not let it." But some of the Marines were falling to their knees. The pressure was too much. After days of fighting with almost no sleep, their mental defenses were crumbling. Amy felt herself slipping. The fear was overwhelming, crushing. She saw her mother, her father, her little brother back on Earth. She saw them dying, screaming, being eaten alive. Then she remembered something Chris Burke had said on Valari Prime. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is just your brain telling you that something matters. Her family mattered. Her friends mattered. Her species mattered. And she would not let some overgrown insect take them away. She pushed through the fear and raised her rifle. "Colonel, I have a clear shot." Pete was on his hands and knees, blood dripping from his nose. The psychic attack was tearing him apart. But he looked up and saw what Amy saw. A clear line of fire to the Overmind. "Do it," he whispered. "Take the shot." Amy fired. The bullet crossed the chamber in a fraction of a second and struck the Overmind directly. Nothing happened. The Overmind was protected by some kind of energy field. The bullet had not even scratched it. Amy felt despair wash over her. They had come so far, lost so many people, and it was all for nothing. Then Pete stood up. He reached into his pack and pulled out something that made Amy's blood run cold. A nuclear charge. Small enough to carry, powerful enough to destroy a city block. "Colonel, no," Amy said. Pete looked at her with calm eyes. "Get the others out, Corporal. You have 3 minutes. We can find another way." "There is no other way. This is why I came." He smiled, and for a moment he looked peaceful. "It has been an honor serving with you, Lynn. Now go." "That is an order." Amy wanted to argue. She wanted to stay and fight. But she was a Marine, and Marines followed orders. She gathered the survivors. Less than 50 now, and ran up behind her. Colonel Pete Vasquez walked toward the Overmind. The creature's psychic attacks battered against his mind, but he did not stop. He had made his choice. He knew what he had to do. He thought about his wife back home. He thought about his daughter, who was probably asleep right now, dreaming of her father. Dreaming of her father. "I love you," he whispered. Then he pressed the button. The explosion tore through the command vessel like fire through paper. The Overmind, ancient and powerful and terrible, was vaporized in an instant. And across the system, every Keth creature suddenly went still. The swarm was dead. The silence was the strangest part. For 5 days, the space above Velari Prime had been filled with explosions and screams and the terrible clicking of cat mandibles. Now there was nothing. The swarm had stopped moving. Ships that had been attacking moments ago now drifted aimlessly, their crews wandering in mindless circles. Warriors that had been killing and consuming simply sat down and waited to die. On the bridge of the Relentless Hope, Admiral Katie Brennan watched the tactical display change from red to green. Enemy contacts were disappearing one by one. Not destroyed, just no longer a threat. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Dana Price, her voice full of disbelief. "The Overmind is gone. The swarm is finished." Katie closed her eyes. She should have felt joy. They had won. They had done the impossible. But all she could think about was the cost. 4,732 humans had died at Velari Prime. That number would be carved into memorials. Back on Earth, families would receive messages telling them that their loved ones were never coming home. Children would grow up without parents. Parents would bury their children. And for what? For a species that had called them monsters. She opened her eyes and looked at her crew. They were exhausted, wounded, grieving. Many of them had lost friends in the battle. Some had lost brothers and sisters. But they were still here. They were still standing. "Tell the fleet to stand down," Katie said quietly. "Begin search and rescue operations. Look for survivors from our destroyed ships. And contact Velari Prime. Tell them it is over." The celebration on Velari Prime lasted for 7 days. The Velari did not have a strong sense of war or violence, so their celebrations focused on other things: music, art, dancing, gratitude. Every human who walked through their streets was treated like a hero. Children brought flowers. Adults offered food and drink. Elderly Velari, who had never touched an alien before, held human hands and wept. Katie attended the official ceremony on the 3rd day. She wore her dress uniform, which felt strange after so many days in combat gear. The Grand Assembly of Velari Prime was a beautiful building made of crystal and light, designed to hold thousands. Today it held representatives from every major species in the Galactic Concord. High Minister Celis stood at the center of the chamber. He was old now, his silver eyes clouded with age, but his voice was strong. "For 300 years, he said, the Galactic Concord kept humanity at arm's length. We called them dangerous. We called them unpredictable. We called them monsters." He paused and looked directly at Katie. "We were fools." The chamber was silent. "When the Kef came, when our cities burned and our people died, who came to save us? Not our allies in the Concord. Not the species we had traded with for millennia. Humanity came. The Deathworlders, as we called them, traveled across the stars to fight and die for people who had rejected them." He walked down from his platform and approached Katie, even standing at full height. He was taller than her, but somehow she seemed larger. She carried herself like someone who had seen the worst the universe had to offer and refused to break. "Admiral Katie Brennan," Celis said formally, "on behalf of the Velari Dominion and all the species of the Galactic Concord, I offer our deepest apology and our deepest gratitude." Katie looked out at the assembled aliens. She saw Velari with their delicate features and silver eyes. She saw Tarathi, massive creatures covered in thick scales. She saw Fanari, small beings with 4 arms and quick movements. She saw dozens of species, all looking at her with the same expression: respect. "High Minister," Katie said, "we did not come here for gratitude. We came because it was the right thing to do." "I know," Celis replied. "That is what makes it so remarkable." The Concord ambassador, an ancient creature called Vorik, stepped forward. Vorik was one of the oldest beings in the galaxy, a member of a species that had helped found the Concord itself. When Vorik spoke, everyone listened. "Admiral Brennan," Vorik said, "by unanimous vote of the Galactic Concord, humanity's classification as a restricted species has been permanently revoked. Earth and all human colonies are hereby granted full membership in the Concord, with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities that come with it." Katie heard gasps from behind her. She turned and saw her surviving officers: Lieutenant Dana Price, Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison, Corporal Amy Lynn, and dozens of others. They had given so much for this moment. They had lost so much. Furthermore, Vorik continued, the Concord wishes to establish a permanent alliance with humanity. We have seen what you can do in war. We would like to see what you can do in peace. Katie turned back to Vorik. On behalf of humanity, I accept. The chamber erupted in applause. For the first time in 300 years, humans were not alone in the galaxy. After the ceremony, Katie walked through the streets of Serenthal. The city was still damaged, still scarred by the swarm's attack, but the Valari were already rebuilding. Crystal towers were rising from the rubble. Gardens were being replanted. Life was returning. A young Valari ran up to her, a boy barely tall enough to reach her waist. She recognized him from somewhere, but it took a moment to place the face. "Terrace?" she asked. The boy nodded eagerly. "Admiral Brennan, I wanted to thank you. Major Berg told me about you. He said you were the one who decided to come and help us." Katie smiled sadly. "A lot of brave people made that possible, Terrace. Not just me. I know. But you chose to come even though we did not deserve it." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was gentle, careful, nothing like the way humans touched each other. "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people who need it, even if they do not deserve it." Katie felt tears forming in her eyes. She knelt down so she was at eye level with the boy. "Terrace, listen to me. Everyone deserves help when they are in trouble. That is what the humans who died here believed. They did not ask whether the Valari deserved to be saved. They just saw people who needed help and did what they could." Terrace nodded solemnly. "I understand. Good? And Terrace? Maybe one day, if Earth needs help, you will remember this moment and come to help us." "I promise," the boy said. "I promise I will." Katie stood up and looked at the sky. The stars were beginning to appear as night fell on Valari Prime. Somewhere out there, among those distant lights, was Earth, her home. The home of a species that the galaxy had called monsters. But they were not monsters. They never had been. They were humans. They were strong and stubborn and sometimes violent. They were also kind and brave and willing to die for strangers. They were complicated and contradictory and beautifully imperfect. And now, finally, the galaxy understood. The Deathworlders had become saviors. The monsters had become heroes. A new chapter in galactic history was about to begin. Katie smiled and walked back toward the spaceport. There was still work to do, still a fleet to command, still a universe to explore. But for the first time in 300 years, humanity would not be doing it alone.